does anybody have any questions? I think that you can either put in the chat, or I think you can come up and talk through a microphone if anybody wants to do that.
No, doesn't seem to be any questions for you there, Johnny. Obviously, you must have covered everything perfectly. Well done.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, if anyone does have questions or wants to ask Johnny anything at all, are you hanging around for a little bit?
Yeah, I'm gonna watch. Oh, sorry, there's a question in the chat actually, Thomas. Which certs are worth the cost? That is a difficult one to answer because I know that sort of more recently, as more sort of cheaper and more cost-effective certs have come out than things like OSCP, you might get a similar amount of content covered, but if, like I said about HR potentially not having a clue what an altered security cert is and they've been told to look for OSCP, then the OSCP is the one that you need to get you through the door. But I think the industry is changing. Oh, my mic got turned off there. You can have more of an interest and passion than somebody who actually has more knowledge, and you can be taught the knowledge. So I think, I do feel like it's changing a little bit in terms of that. Like I said, the altered security courses, I definitely think are worth the money. They tend to be about $250 or $300, including an exam attempt. So that's £200 to £250, I guess, for 30 days lab access, and they're quite specific. So they've got Azure ones, they've got AD ones, and yeah, I've done a few of those, and I've always learned something. And they give you, a collection of tools that you might have to spend time finding out otherwise, and things like that. So yeah, and Nick Hill, who puts those courses together, is kind of an industry legend. So yeah, that's what I'd say for that. Happy to discuss further if you want to get me on LinkedIn or email or anything as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and as you said, you're going to be wandering around. So if you want to speak to Johnny, just walk up to him. He's going to. I think you did say you are going to be listening to Simon's talk next. Anyway, though, which
I'm going to go sit on a bench and.
Yeah. One of the things that you said actually segues quite well into what Simon's going to be talking about, and that was the communication side of thing. From working with a lot of testing companies and a lot of testers, it is something which I feel can be improved upon at times. And Simon, having been doing it a lot longer than you, Johnny, which you'll see from his look when he gets on stage, no doubt you'll be able to tell he's got a lot of experience. He's been there, and one of the key things that he knows about and talks about is communication within security testing and within professional services as well. But thank you very much, Johnny. And are you at the actual event tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm hoping to come over. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, because I know there's a few people here who are in the auditorium listening to you. Who'll be there as well, so you can always ask him some questions tomorrow. Potentially, we can come ask you questions in person tomorrow as well. But cool, fantastic. Thank you very much, Johnny.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, well, should we throw in some confetti? Johnny. There you go. Perfect. So next up, we've got Chapman, I can see is already next to the stage. He's looking forward to this. He's excited. Again, I'll leave you to do your full introduction, but as I said, people will be able to see your experience just from your video there, Simon. So
Is that a compliment? I think that's a compliment.
Yeah, take it as one. Fine. Yeah, perfect. Right, I'm gonna pass over to you, Simon, to take on the next talk.
All right, cool.
Yeah,
Thanks,
no
Lee.
worries.
Thanks, Lee,
Cheers.
and thanks, Johnny, as well. I enjoyed your talk, and I know we haven't collaborated on our particular respective talks, but there is kind of a bit of overlap really with what I'm going to talk about. In fact, before I start talking about it, when I get the slides up, that would be good. Let's try that one. Okay, does that work? Yep. Let's just see if I can get the presenter view up in the right place. Okay, that looks about right. There we go. We'll go back one. All right. So I'm going to talk about, well, communication skills broadly. My background is in offensive security. So I've spent the last 25 years, I guess. That's why, there you go. That's what the face of the man who spent 25 years in offensive security looks like. The thing that I've learned during that time is that although technical skills are obviously important, they as the longer you're in the industry, the more you realize there are other things which are actually just as, if not more important. And I'll hopefully go into the theme of that a little bit more during this chat and explain why that's the case. So I spent 25 years leading offensive security teams, building them, and I currently help other pen test companies do the same thing, basically, but with an emphasis on those communication skills. There's two parts of it. The contents. I don't know why I call it contents. I just call them contents. We've got two sections. We've got the fooling yourself bit, which we'll talk about now, and there's the rocket science bit later on, which hopefully this will all make sense as we go forward. So, all right. So the first part is about fooling yourself. Now, when we're communicating with our clients, with our colleagues, whoever, we work in an environment in cyber generally. I'm not focusing particularly on offensive security here. So those of you who are not necessarily interested in offensive security, pen testing, whatever else, this presentation isn't specifically about that. It's general to the subject of working in an environment where there's lots of complex ideas being bandied around. But we tend to fool ourselves when we don't really know what's happening properly, where we think we know what's going on, but we've kind of pressed a button and we've seen something happen and we've kind of assumed that actually what's happening. And the fact is that that's not always that's not always the case. This quote from Richard Feynman probably sums it up far more eloquently than I can. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. When we are working in things like offensive security, we'll make findings. Things like SQL injection findings, or there'll be some observation we've made, and that we may well take that first observation as being, oh yeah, that's what that is. I work with pen testers all the time, and they'll show me a finding, and the finding will be, look, I've got this unauthenticated SQL injection issue, and then when you look at it really carefully, it's not actually unauthenticated. There's actually something else going on. There's actually some other token being passed which is authenticating the request. So what turned out to be a critical, ultra serious finding, it's still significant, but not as significant as originally thought. And once or twice in your career, you can go through, you will go through in your cyber career, one or two instances where you burst into the room and say, my God, guys, I found something amazing. And it just turns out not to be the case. And that's sort of a humbling experience. You can listen to people like me talking about this, but it's not until Okay, so where were we? We're talking about there's so much tooling in the environments that we work in these days that it's very hard to sometimes work out exactly what is going on. But the truth is, if we're being a bit hard on ourselves, maybe we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. Cyber is hard. The subject that we're all interested in, that we're talking about, the field that we're all either in or looking to get into is tough. Yeah, it's very wide, but it's not very deep sometimes. In the offensive security, well, in all spaces, you sometimes find you have to know a little about many things, and it's sometimes a bit of an expensive luxury to know a lot about just one thing. You sort of have to be a bit of a generalist, and people expect you to be an expert, even if you're not. You don't consider yourself an expert. Here's that imposter syndrome thing being tweaked again, but the expertise is nevertheless expected of you. And of course, we all want to please people. You don't want to look like an idiot. And yet, sometimes you find yourself in a situation where, for whatever reason, you're at a disadvantage. I was remembering a story when I was writing this slide about a time that I was asked by a well-known bank to contribute to a project it was a cryptographic based project. There was a security discussion going on, and I was doing some testing on some infrastructure to validate some controls they had in place, some payment based system. And I went to a meeting with the client, and basically the client was there's a number of people in the room, and I was talking to them about, to cut to the chase, random number generation. Now, I'm not a cryptanalyst, I'm not an academic, but I kind of thought I knew a few things about random number generation and its effect on the security of the system we were looking at. So I launched into this great lecture about random numbers and how random numbers are not really random numbers and strategies for defeating that and all sorts of things and predictability. And anyway, I went on for about 5 minutes or so, and then there's two guys opposite me, and after I'd finished, they sort of looked at each other and looked at me, and they said, "Well, that's interesting, Sam, but during our PhD research into this, we've done some analysis and we think we've got some answers." So, of course, at which point I realised I'd completely overreached and sort of embarrassed myself in front of these two guys who were effectively complete and utter experts in this field, and because I didn't have that situational awareness, I just kind of blundered in to tell these guys about all I knew about random number generation, which of course was pathetic and insignificant compared to the knowledge that they had. So you have to know your audience, it turns out. And again, this is one of those things that's part of the communications strategy, is knowing who you're talking to in the first place, whether they're people that need all the detail, some of the detail, or they need an interpretation or a summary or whatever else. So we have to know your audience. Now, obviously, I'm trying to use humor in my own inimitable style, but there's a serious point here, and that's because there's a lot of this in our industry, the cyber industry generally, and specifically in offensive security. We find ourselves not necessarily being sympathetic with our audience and imposing our view upon them and talking down to people. Another story is where I was explaining to a different client this time, about a web app vulnerability I'd spotted during a test that was being conducted. And we had this, again, this was going back a few years when it was very common to go back on site and have a wash-up meeting sort of face-to-face with the client. Such things are less common these days, but I thought that this was an indication that there was pretty weak security awareness amongst the developers, and that some of the mistakes they've made, in my humble opinion, were pretty elementary, and ultimately could be explained by just poor training and poor awareness. And I could have banged on about this for a while. And again, I didn't really know who I was talking to. I did not know my audience. The person who I was addressing was, in fact, the head of development. And they were the person who'd commissioned the test in the first place. So quite apart from me, supporting the process and supporting the client, I was actually embarrassing our sponsor effectively by telling him how bad the developers' security awareness was. So again, lack of awareness and lack of empathy was ultimately my undoing during that occasion. I have to say at this point though, when you tell these stories and you sort of tell people about the mistakes you've made in the past, you might I talked to my wife about this, and she said, "Why are you telling people this? They'll think you're an idiot." Well, I mean, yeah, people may think that in any case, but yeah, this is over a long period of time. Okay, these are not mistakes I make every week. This is over many years. In my defense. Yeah. Okay. So, how do we do good explainage? Okay. Well, I would say that how we do good explainage is first of all focus on grammar. That's an oldie but goodie. So I think with much material that we communicate to clients, it's in a written form, whether it's an email, it's a report, or whatever else. There's writing is critical to any mode of communication. So they're one of the basics you want to get sorted out. Okay, no points for guessing that good grammar is a good thing. But there's other things. There's empathy, self-awareness, context, and obviously technical understanding. I've already showed you examples of how my empathy and self-awareness let me down by not knowing who the hell I was talking to, and straying well out of my depth in terms of the audience. But there's also context, and that's something which we'll explore in the upcoming slides. But before we do that, we'll kind of divert slightly about and focus on some surprising truths. And this is something actually Johnny sort of touched upon. Perhaps he didn't realize he was doing it, but there's a bit of an overlap on this next slide. But before I get to that, it's just worth remembering that in our industry and in the cyber world, there's a lot of technical knowledge, and we give that priority sometimes when we're communicating with clients. But without the other parts of the picture, the self-awareness, the empathy, the context of what you're talking about, then the knowledge sort of gets in the way of the message, and that creates a division between you and the client. We've all been in situations where the client is kind of looking at us, either disagreeing, not understanding us, and we're getting more and more frustrated by that, and the relationship is becoming difficult, and that's a cause of stress for us as well. I have this secret, not so secret. I have this idea that there's a lot of stress and burnout, particularly in offensive security. And I think perhaps one of the reasons for that is because of these communications issues, that there's a frustration on our side that the client just doesn't bloody well get it. But that's not true always. Maybe we're just not saying things in the right way. So maybe the benefit of all of communications clarity is to make your own life easier and a bit less stressful. Everyone could get behind that idea, I'm sure. So here's the surprising truth section. This is one of those things when you start off in your career, and this is a good thing. I'm not going to criticize this. You like to think you're trying to make the world a better place. You're trying to help people, and so on. And these are all fine objectives and ambitions, and indeed they may even be true. That there could be truth in that. We may actually be making the world a better place through our work, but often the way that's perceived by clients isn't what you think. There's this mismatch. So on the left and right there, you can see quite clearly there's the client perceptions versus your perceptions. And how many of us have been in a meeting when you're sort of banging home a point saying, I'm providing as much detail as I can, and the client is just rolling off the client's back like water off a duck's back. And the client's just thinking, this doesn't have anything to do with me. This is not my problem. This is an IT problem. This is a third-party supplier problem. This is not me. I don't know why. You don't even know why you're telling me this. And the same again. You're explaining stuff which really enthuses you. You're like, oh, this is you guys. I've found this amazing exploit. Look at the proof of concept I've put together. And the client's just going, nope, didn't ask for that. That's more than I wanted. You're over-delivering. You're giving me a problem. You're making it harder. And you're coming back and thinking, they're going to love this. When I show them this, they're going to go, thanks, guys. Thanks so much. But the client is thinking, I just have so many other things to be getting on with. This is just far too much information. And again, you're thinking, I'm really helping them here. And they're thinking, we're just going to do the minimum. And then the big one is, where you go in and say, this is a really important finding you need to address. And the client says, no, it's not. That's just not a priority for us. So you can see that there's going to, because of this mismatch, and perhaps because of the way that these things are communicated, how that stress can happen and how that dissatisfaction can happen. And it's not something you see coming until you've experienced it a few times, and then you just think, why are clients so stupid? Why don't they understand the severity and the importance of what I'm talking about? And this is why, because they just don't perceive it the same way. Okay, so let's talk about context for a minute. So context is one of the things we talked in the slides earlier, which are important in terms of how we communicate in my little part of the world, offensive security, how we communicate maybe a vulnerability or a finding. But this could be anything. This is a generalized, abstracted idea about an issue that has been located. And it's entitled, "A small fire has been detected." So you might think to yourself, a small fire has been detected, that's cool. But the context is in the picture. There is a small fire, it has been detected. How severe is that? We can all say quite clearly it's not that severe at this time. It's pretty much contained. Is there any danger of it escalating? Possibly. Somebody might not like the way that woman's singing and smash a guitar into the fire or something. So they could, but that's very unlikely. And in reality, it's probably all cool. So the context tells us that this isn't really a particular issue. And that's something which we can think of too. Are we aligning the findings with the client's operating model and their risk appetite and so on? So you need empathy there to understand that. So let's take the same finding and take it into a different operating model. Here's a different operating model. So now we've got the same finding under the same terminology has been used, the same finding. A small fire has been detected. So now we have a wholly different kettle of fish. I know this is a slightly silly example, and it's sort of overstated, but it's designed to sort of super simplify and illustrate the point. It all depends on the context. The same finding, small fires have been detected. Right now, in this context, in this operating model, that's a massive issue, and everybody that's an executive in this situation, i.e. the two people in front there, need to know about that immediately and act upon it. So there we go. That's so much for context. But as you can see, the same finding, just because it says SQL injection, that's not automatically a problem. It really isn't. I know it's hard to hear that for some of us that are in offensive security, but it really isn't. Just as an aside, there's a point at which the client will tell you that actually this isn't an issue for us. You can ignore that. You can take that out of the report. I don't need to see that. So then you're presented with an ethical dilemma about reporting things. And this is another presentation altogether about the ethical angles of communicating findings and when you should simply ignore the client and report things everywhere anyway, or whether you think, yeah, okay, we'll take that on the chin. That's not fine. That's not relevant. We'll remove it. That's for another time. Okay, moving on. Time's moving on swiftly, isn't it? Here's another context one. Confession, this is something I did put on my LinkedIn thing a while ago, so this is not completely fresh content, but I liked it more than everybody else did, so it's going in here right now. This is about context. So the context here is to ask the question, spot the odd one out. I can't do a show of hands because I can't see them, but I'm guessing if I ask you which the odd one out was there, most people would pretty quickly identify the clown soldier as being the odd one out. That's okay, but that's because we don't know any context, or we've assumed the context. In reality, we can never assume context. We have to learn it, and we have to empathize, and we have to pick up on exactly what the situation is. Because when we apply context, and suddenly we realize, oh, actually, no, this is not what it seems. This is clown combat school. The only guy that's turned up correctly dressed and prepared is the clown guy. Everyone else has did not get the memo. I know what you're thinking. A fairly ridiculous example, but sometimes ridiculous examples serve to prove a simple point, which in reality is quite subtle and hard to see. It's very easy to see here that the context has shifted, but we don't always get that a black and white, straightforward comparison in our own work. We have to work at it. Right. So the last slide in this section is, so here's the thing. When I was doing this presentation, I downloaded this presentation pack from PowerPoint, and there was one slide. This slide was just in the default Microsoft one. I haven't changed it, and I just thought, oh, look at that. That's an actual slide that actually fits what I was going to say. What are the chances of that? So there you go. Thanks, Walt Disney. Here to get started, just to quit talking, begin doing. Let's move to part 2. The clock ticks. So episode 2 is not rocket science unless you're a rocket scientist. So the whole time I've actually been paraphrasing Albert Einstein. I think if you're going to quote someone or you're going to model your ideas on someone, it may as well be someone with big ideas. But the point I'm making here, in this second piece, is that our industry, I think, can learn quite a bit from other professions and other disciplines, and in particular the science community generally. Albert Einstein gave me the inspiration for the title of this talk, and his quote is, I think, fairly straightforward and easy to understand, which in itself sort of proves the point. But we can learn more about effective communication by people who are very, very expert in their field and know things to a level that most of us don't know. Some examples: we could always think of people who are good communicators. The point of good communication from a position of expertise is to inspire people. You're talking to them, you're not talking down to them. And one of the other mistakes that happens a lot is where we assume that the audience is stupid, and the fact they're not an expert in your field, they don't deserve to understand this, and they're not worthy of understanding it. You may not think that exactly, but that comes across in the way I hear a lot of people talking, explaining technical concepts to people who are not technical. If you look at the examples of the people here, these are all people who are highly qualified, accredited, and experienced in their field, and yet we know them from TV and from programs where they've communicated very complex things to us. When I listen to these people speaking, I feel like I've understood something. I don't know anything at all about planetary science, archaeology, criminal forensics, but when I listen to these guys presenting, I feel like I've learned something, and that's what we need to aim for. Is the fact is the point at which we feel like we've educated our users, not in a preachy way, but just in a way that makes them feel like they've learned something from the conversation. Let's move on. Here's the thing: summarizing. I can't have a conversation with anyone these days without mentioning somehow AI. Yeah, I know. I felt the collective groan coming down the wire. I'm not going to talk about AI anymore than this, what's on this slide. However, I would say that for me personally, one of the things which is that I use ChatGPT for to great effect a lot is summarizing stuff. It is absolutely superb if you ask it nicely to summarize things for you. It does an amazing job. Certainly a great time saver. I think it's the most useful daily application. It's certainly in my experience. Do ask it though to summarize things in a different style. I like the Charles Dickens mode. It's very, very amusing ways. You ever heard Dickensian English used to describe suicide request forgery? That's amazing. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But with that, all this comes with a warning though. As we all know with AI, it's okay if you want it to carry out tasks that you haven't got time to do, or give you insight that maybe you haven't got. But if you don't know what you're asking, you don't understand what you're asking for it, then it will replace you ultimately. There you go. There's my talk on AI. If you don't know what you're doing, it's just going to replace you. The only thing we've got left as humans is empathy, self-awareness, and context. That's the things that AI is still perhaps not quite ready to replace us yet. So I'm going to start rounding off the presentation now with something which, if anyone's worked with me before, I don't know if anybody who knows me from a work life in the audience, but AC/DC, I'm not necessarily referring to AC/DC, the band, but there's a little mnemonic thing that I came up with some years ago, which is actionable, correct, defensible, and clear. And it's just a checklist. There's sort of something to leave you with, I suppose. Something which I always ask people when they're sort of QAing reports or writing reports. Just use this as a little list just to help yourself double check that your communication is hitting the mark. So does the reader know what to do when you have given them a recommendation? Have you given them clear guidance? So clear, is it in plain English or the appropriate language? Is it unambiguous in that regard? Is it technically correct? We talked about fooling ourselves. Have you actually made a mistake fundamentally within the technical aspect of what you've reported, which means that what you're saying is just wrong? And lastly, but not leastly, probably the most important one, is it defensible? Everybody in this audience who wishes to be or will be involved in some kind of cyber career will at some point have to defend their work to a critical audience. And this will be a peer, it'll be a client, a courtroom, somebody. It will happen to you. And defensibility is the moment where you think, right, can you justify your finding? Can you justify why you said that and what the recommendation was of why you recommended that, why you did or did not do something? That's something which is hugely important. And I can tell you all about that all day, but you'll have to just experience that for yourself. Sorry, if I could bottle it and sell it, I would. Okay, so we're coming up to the end, so I'll wrap it up. I didn't get ChatGPT to summarize this because I should have done, shouldn't I? I should have followed my own instruction. It's great at summarizing stuff, but I didn't summarize it. Okay, I'll summarize it for you using my own brain. Understand that you can be fooled. Try not to fool yourself. Have empathy with your audience, and always give thought to the context of your discussion and what you're saying. If you have those things in mind, then your communications are likely to be more effective, more defensible, and hopefully your life will be just slightly less stressful. Or you can reserve it for other things that are stressful. That's it. That's the end of the presentation. If anyone's got any questions, I would be delighted to answer them, or I'll be hanging around anyway if you want to catch up and chat about something. So thank you very much.